Chapter 11, Part 2 on mind and body. So I'm going to get a little into detail about Chuck Close here, who's our artist here. This is a 9-foot high painting of his grandmother. I know it looks like a photograph, and that's one thing I gotta stress to you guys. Really look at what it says. It says oil on canvas. So when you thumb through the book, and again, everything is a photograph of an artwork. Sometimes what you're getting is a photograph, or perhaps a digital file uploaded to the book. But you want to be careful because some work might be more realistic than others and perhaps look like a photograph, and it is not. Okay? When you're looking at a photograph of architecture, you're not looking at the photograph, you're looking at the building. Same thing with the sculpture. All the other stuff around it is not important to the sculpture unless it's an installation, and it will tell you that. Okay? So just be a little careful. Watch where you are in the book. If we're not talking about photography, then think about the title a little more closely. The fig number here, 11.6, it gives you some details. So in this particular case, this is Chuck Close's grandmother, and she does he paints her in black and white for the most part. I think there might be a hint of mixed colors in here, but I think it's black and white. And he does this with his finger. Now, I don't have an up close of the fingerprints to show you. You might wish to Google that online, but I gave you a couple links about Chuck Close, one of which is Wikipedia, and it will tell you how he has face blindness. Now, what that is that you look at people's faces and you can't recognize them very well. I have a similar thing. I have a really hard time recognizing faces, and I really make distinctions about like who's wearing glasses or who their teeth. I look at people's teeth more, my students. I really struggle sometimes because I just don't figure out facial features very well. Its voice is another thing I use. When I hear people's voice, I know who they are. But at any rate, he has total face blindness, a much more severe situation. So he became interested in doing these portraits, which I think is a really wild situation for an artist. Now, this sometimes happens. So with an artist, say they had a real affinity, they love, like in Van Gogh's case, he loves the color yellow and sunflowers and sunlight, and he depicts a lot of that. But sometimes with artists, it's what they can't understand or what they don't do well initially or something like that. That's what inspires them to explore that issue or problem, as you could put it. The other issue with him is that he had some disabilities. He had some diseases as a child, and then he was later paralyzed and had to learn how to paint in a very different way. Throughout most of his career, though, before the accident or the event, as he calls it, he did use a grid. You can't see the grid in this one. Remember that other portrait we looked at? It has some gridded lines for the painting, but in this case you can't see the grid. It's been erased, but what we're looking at is a photo realistic image that is actually painted from using a photo. So an artist can, I think we didn't look at the other ones. An artist can use a photo, and in his case, he got it really three-dimensional, really wild. All this texture and all this dark and light. We can really see the shadows, and she seems very three-dimensional. So that was his idea, is studying the face longer by really making it huge, taking a long time to paint these pieces, and he used his fingers in this case. I know, mind-boggling. It's hard to imagine such detail. Another portrait artist that Nancy Berson. Now these are photographs. This is silver gelatin print, which is a very fancy photographic process from 1992. Photographers don't use this as much as they used to, but this is an older style, pre-digital camera way of printing photos. So she became curious about different facial types from genetic conditions, accident, or disease. So again, a little bit of exploration of the darker side, perhaps, or the some of the issues that we have in the world and how these diseases manifest themselves. So she photographed a lot of children and different people with diseases and wanted to kind of bring them into the mainstream and have people look at them and understand their situation. So she's also trying to show us some friendliness, and she uses this kind of blurriness to give us some dreaminess as well. Okay. So Leigh Bowery is a very famous performance art, a little bit adult for you all. But this fellow is a real person, and he was painted by Lucian Freud. Now, Lucian Freud is actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud, the guy who invented psychoanalysis. But that doesn't really come into his painting at all. It's just that, he he had the wherewithal to have a life as a painter. He's known for his flesh tones and his investigation of colors of flesh and making things look fairly realistic but somewhat impressionistic. It's the brushstrokes are kind of seen. You can see it, how it's somewhat abstracted, if that makes sense. But he would take different subjects, different people, have them in his studio, and spend a ton of time painting them. He kind of brought back figurative painting at this time. In the early, late 20th century, early 21st century. Figurative painting wasn't all that popular, and he spent a lot of time doing this. So what he's trying to convey here, over time, he's spending a lot of time with the person. So he's trying to get the sitter's emotions and personality to come through the face that he's rendering. So he's known for his range of paint applications and revealing the inner being of his sitters. A lot of people get annoyed with him. Famous people want to have themselves painted by Lucian Freud, but they don't realize the time commitment they're making. David Hockney was one person, very famous painter himself, and he did not want to sit there for that long a period of time. He got a little irritated with Lucian Freud, but he really brings out these beautiful flesh tones and lets that person's personality emerge. So Leigh under the skylight is not an idealized figure, just to make that point, obviously. This is his real body. And then our Doryphorus here is our Greco-Roman. This is a Greek marble sculpture. And this is highly idealized, of course, this perfect athletic body. So there are a range of ways that we deal with the body. And this particular case over here is idealized. Leigh Bowery is not idealized, but his flesh and his musculature, his face, all of these details are quite loved in the way that they're painted very carefully and accurately. Okay, the next one we get into is Bill Viola. Now, these are stills from a video installation. They look like photographs. You go in to the gallery or the museum, and they're look like little flat screen TVs hung up. We're not really including the border to the flat screen, but he is the premier video artist in the world, I would say. I don't know if that's still true, but at year 2000, it certainly was. 2010, it certainly was. But this is the Dolorosa, and he shows a weeping man and woman. What he did is he had a artist residency at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. And if you go to the Getty, you're going to see that a lot of their collection, not all of it, but the old Getty in Malibu, and then some of the new Getty off of the 405, those collections have to do with Greco-Roman antiquities and also some Renaissance art, and the focus being on classicism and older artworks. Now, because that came from the Getty collection. So at any rate, he's portraying these faces in modern dress, the actual modern people, of course, but they're not in costumes, and they're showing emotion. And he plays these videos at real time, but the actors are told to barely move, and they barely do. So the tears are running down their faces. This is a series from the Passions, and it's based on the Renaissance and Baroque paintings of figures in sorrow, ecstasy, or astonishment. So he's trying to show real emotion although these are actors, and but I'm sure they're thinking about a genuinely sad thought. But at any rate, he's trying to show these emotions in video art. Very slow, very subtle. So there's different types of self-portraits, and artists create for themselves. And we're going to look at a range of these things from our friend Rembrandt here, Frida Kahlo. We all know this image, hopefully. And Cindy Sherman, she might be new for you. And this artist, Mariko Mori. So we have some different styles of self-portraits to get into. Rembrandt did several self-portraits, and he's kind of recording his own face and his own emotions and it's sort of like a diary for him, if that makes sense. So this is his older self, and he does have younger ones. So he may, in 1669, he is painting this self-portrait to show him as an older figure.